Let me be straight with you about something. I don't get surprised at OTAs. Not anymore. After years of watching these spring practices, where nobody's hitting, quarterbacks are untouchable, and half the highlights you see would never survive a real snap in September, I've trained myself to feel almost nothing. Measured detachment is the professional standard, and I carry it religiously into every single one of these sessions. But there are rare moments in this league, genuinely rare, when something overrides that filter completely. Not because of a catch, not because of a number on a speed chart, because you look at a player and your brain registers something it wasn't expecting before your mouth can even form the question. That's exactly what happened to me last week in Cleveland. Isaiah Bond walked onto that practice field and I stopped mid-sentence, put the clipboard down, just watched. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say that, because I'm not talking about the kind of vague excitement that gets manufactured around every promising young receiver every spring in this league. I've seen enough of those stories collapse by week 4 of the regular season that I've become genuinely immune to them. What I mean is this. I looked at Bond and my brain immediately flagged a discrepancy. The player in front of me did not match the player I had filed away from his rookie year. Not refined, not polished, not improved, transformed. The word sounds dramatic until you're standing 20 yards from someone whose entire physical architecture has shifted in a single off-season window, and then it's the only word that actually fits. So let me walk you through exactly what I saw, because what's happening with Isaiah Bond right now is something that Browns fans, fantasy managers, and anyone paying attention to the AFC North should genuinely understand before the regular season begins. Start with the body, because there's no honest way to approach this conversation from any other direction. Bond put on approximately 15 pounds of muscle between the end of last season and those OTA sessions. And I know what you're doing right now. You're filing that away as routine off-season news. Player adds weight? Sure, they all say that. It means nothing until it means something. But here's what I need you to understand about these particular 15 pounds on this particular player. This wasn't comfort weight. This wasn't a guy who stopped doing extra cardio and started eating more. This was architectural work, targeted, intelligent, load-bearing mass placed precisely in the anatomical locations that had cost him most during year 1. His shoulders fill his pads differently now. His lower half drives through route breaks with a planted stability that wasn't there before. And at the catch point, in that contested moment when a corner is competing for the same ball, arms up, body pressing, Bond now occupies space in a way that fundamentally changes the defensive calculation. A corner who would have bodied him off his stem last fall is now dealing with a different physical reality. That's not small. That changes what routes you can run, what coverages you can attack, and how a coordinator has to scheme to stop you. But here's the part that genuinely matters. The part that separates what Bond did from what receivers who bulk up in the offseason usually do. He didn't give anything back. Not a step, not a millisecond of burst, not a fraction of that first step explosion that makes speed receivers terrifying in the open field. And that sounds simple when I say it out loud, but the physiological reality of what that actually requires is anything but simple. Adding 15 pounds of real, functional, fast twitch-compatible muscle mass on a speed receiver in a single offseason is a legitimate challenge to the body's athletic architecture. The overwhelming majority of receivers who attempt it, even with elite training staffs, even with NFL-level nutrition resources, even with every possible advantage, sacrifice something in the exchange. The burst feels marginally slower. The defensive back can feel it before they can articulate it. Coaches accept the trade because the physicality is worth it. Bond made no trade. He absorbed everything and kept everything else. And that specific combination, elite speed fully intact, now backed by genuine functional power, is the kind of profile that defensive coordinators don't schematically neutralize. Speed alone you can account for. Strength alone you can outrun. Speed and strength in one body running precise routes in June? That's the profile that causes real problems in October, I pulled him aside after those reps, and the conversation is one I keep returning to in my head, not because of what he said, but because of the manner in which he said it. There's a template in the NFL for how players talk about off-season work. You've heard it 10,000 times. The commitment, the hunger, the work nobody sees, the sacrifice, the growth. It sounds correct, and it tells you nothing real about who's actually inside the player delivering it. Bond didn't use the template. He talked about the off-season the way a contractor describes fixing a structural problem in a building. Clinical, specific, no drama attached to it. He identified a concrete vulnerability, his ability to handle press coverage, to absorb contact at the line without having his release timing disrupted, to compete against corners who were specifically trying to bully him out of his route structure before he could develop any momentum, and then he went and systematically eliminated that vulnerability. End of story. No redemption narrative, no performance of struggle, just problem, solution, execution. That kind of self-awareness at his career stage is genuinely uncommon. Most second-year receivers are still operating on raw speed as their primary answer to everything. If I'm fast enough, the rest is optional. Bond had already absorbed the lesson that the league usually delivers the hard way. After a veteran corner spends a full season making your life miserable at the line, after a defensive coordinator builds a game plan specifically around the one physical limitation that makes you manageable. He understood it before the league taught it to him, and then he proactively removed that vulnerability from his game. You cannot coach that kind of competitive intelligence. It either lives inside a player or it doesn't. Now here's something I genuinely believe is being underappreciated in every conversation happening around Bond right now, and it matters significantly for understanding what he's actually navigating. This is technically his second season with the Browns. In terms of offensive systems and environmental continuity, he is effectively working inside his third, completely different framework in 3 consecutive years. He came out of Texas operating in a specific college system. He entered the NFL and spent his rookie year decoding professional football from the ground up, which is already a tall enough ask for any young receiver, inside one offensive vocabulary. And now, Todd Monken arrives as offensive coordinator, carrying his own entirely distinct language. Different route concepts, different timing sequences, different pre-snap reads, different situational signals, different philosophical assumptions about how you attack a defense. 3 systems, 3 years, consecutive. For a wide receiver, that kind of systemic disruption is genuinely corrosive to development in ways that don't always show up on the stat sheet. The position runs on pattern recognition, on the game slowing down to the point where your body is already moving correctly before your conscious mind has finished processing the situation. That cognitive deceleration only happens through repetition inside a stable environment. When the environment keeps shifting, you never fully arrive at that place. You stay perpetually behind the moment instead of ahead of it, reacting rather than anticipating. And in this league, the difference between those 2 states is the difference between a good player and one who breaks through to something genuinely special. Most young receivers in Bond's position would be showing visible signs of that churn. It would show up in the hesitation, in the eyes scanning when the body should already be running. Bond flipped it. He described treating the new playbook like the highest leverage investment he could make with his time every single day of the offseason, not as an obligation, not as something to get through, as an opportunity with a measurable return. And the specificity with which he described that process told me it wasn't a media answer. There was texture to it. A methodology with actual mechanics, and the evidence of that methodology is showing up in real time during practice in ways that you can see clearly if you know what you're looking at. But the piece of this that genuinely surprised me, the one that I keep thinking about, is what he was doing during the deepest part of the offseason. While most players in this league have mentally disconnected and are somewhere unreachable, Bond organized private throwing sessions in Miami with his quarterbacks. Let that land for a second. He identified the quarterback-receiver relationship as a structural priority that needed to be built before training camp rather than discovered during it. He arranged the logistics himself. He traveled to a different city. He put in the work with nobody requiring it, nobody monitoring it, and nothing contractually incentivizing it. That is a professional decision made by someone who isn't thinking about surviving his second year. He's thinking about owning it. The chemistry built in those Miami sessions is showing up at these OTAs in ways that are difficult to manufacture on short notice, most visibly with Shedeur Sanders. There is a timing developing between them, an anticipatory quality where the ball is already in the air before the route has fully resolved, because Shedeur has already processed where Bond's going to be. That kind of connection doesn't get installed in a 2-week training camp window. It accumulates through repetition, through a quarterback and receiver spending enough hours together that they develop a geometric understanding of each other's movement, where the break will land, how tight the shoulder turn is going to be, what the stride pattern signals about where the hands are going. Bond started building that architecture weeks before anyone else was even thinking about football season. One specific rep during the one-on-ones crystallized everything I was processing throughout those practices. Bond lined up against a corner in deliberate press alignment, tight, physical, specifically designed to challenge him. One-on-one reps during OTAs carry a particular intensity because there's nowhere to hide inside them. No complementary routes creating natural traffic, no rubs or picks generating breathing room. It's a receiver, a corner, and every pair of eyes on the field watching who wins. Bond fired off the line with a release that looked like it had been distilled down through 10,000 repetitions until no wasted movement remained in it. His hips loaded and exploded differently than they did a year ago. I noticed it in real time and confirmed it watching the film back later. He created clean separation. Shedeur put the ball exactly where it needed to be. Catch, done. What Bond said about that rep afterward is the part that stayed with me since. He described it as a convergence point, the moment where every separate component of his off-season work arrived at the same destination simultaneously. The Miami sessions existed, so Shedeur already knew where he was going to be. The weight room existed, so the press corner couldn't disrupt his release mechanics. The film study existed, so the route concept was automatic rather than processed. The playbook work existed, so there was no hesitation in the pre-snap recognition. Every thread pulling through the same needle at the same moment. And when he described that connection between preparation and performance, it carried no performance in it. It sounded like an engineer explaining how a system he designed actually functions. That understanding, the genuine causal comprehension of how specific work creates specific results, is the cognitive marker that separates a promising player from one who is about to break through something real. The environment around him deserves real attention too, because it's shaping him in ways that won't appear in any statistical preview. Jerry Jeudy anchors that receiver room as the established veteran standard, which is a strange thing to say given how young Jeudy himself still is, but that's the reality of where this organization is in its rebuild. Around him, Casey Concepcion arrives with his own expectations. Denzel Boston is generating genuine internal excitement among people in that building who tend to choose their words carefully, and Bond, physically transformed, mentally locked in, already operating on established chemistry with the starting quarterback, is competing inside a room where nothing is settled and nothing is guaranteed. The hierarchy is genuinely unsettled enough that every practice rep carries real professional consequence for everyone in it. For most young players, that level of competitive pressure is something to manage psychologically, a distraction to neutralize. Bond grew up in competitive environments that made this look manageable. The receiver room at Texas was not a comfortable place for anyone, regardless of ranking or previous production. Weekly competition for targets against players who were going to make NFL rosters regardless of what Bond did or didn't do. He wasn't just exposed to that pressure, he was formed by it. Conception and Boston pushing in this Cleveland room doesn't create friction for him. It creates precision, sharpens the focus instead of splintering it. And then there's Todd Monken, whose arrival as offensive coordinator matters more than it might initially appear in the context of Bond's development. Monken carries a specific professional reputation that is directly relevant to what's happening here. He doesn't build offenses around a conceptual framework and then try to fit players into it. He builds around the actual, specific, individual capabilities of the human beings in his room. For a receiver carrying Bond's particular profile, elite vertical speed, economical release mechanics, and now genuine functional strength to compete through contact, Monken's philosophy is almost architecturally compatible with his strengths. The scheme will ask for what he's good at, not require him to suppress his natural gifts in service of a system that doesn't fit him. That alignment matters. Every single NFL season produces a short list of second-year receivers who convert everything they accumulated in year one into a genuine statistical breakthrough. The pattern is recognizable when you know the indicators: system comfort, quarterback trust built before camp, physical development that addresses specific year-one vulnerabilities, competitive environment that maintains sharpness, a coordinator whose scheme creates space for their specific capabilities. When you go through that checklist honestly and methodically, Bond has quietly checked every single box. Not most of them, all of them. And he did it without much public conversation around any of it. I walked into those OTA practices with my skepticism calibrated correctly. Bond had shown genuine flashes as a rookie, real moments, plays that gave you something to point at. But this league is full of players who peaked at their rookie ceiling while defensive coordinators spent a full offseason engineering their specific neutralization. Flashes are not a career. What I left Cleveland with was something I don't manufacture for the sake of content, because manufactured anticipation has a short shelf life, and I've been doing this long enough to know the difference. What I felt leaving those practices was honest, grounded anticipation. The kind that comes from watching a young player who has already identified the precise gap between who he currently is and who he intends to become, and is visibly, methodically, every single day, closing it. That's not something you perform for a spring practice audience. It either exists inside a player or it doesn't. Isaiah Bond has it. And by October, I don't think it's going to be a secret anymore.